I'm here with Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we were watching you earlier this week in the House Intel Committee questioning Director of National Intelligence Gabbard, CIA Director Ratcliffe. We've been following this story. It's 4 days old at this point. Hard to believe, given all the chatter this week about it, the Signal story. Where do things stand from your vantage point?
Well, so the big missing pieces here are, number one, making sure we understand all the information that was exposed. It turns out that the government shouldn't rely on Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic although he appears to be the guy who has the scoop for all the information. So, we need to know what else was on that Signal chat, if anything. And here's where, this administration needs to make a hard U-turn. There needs to be an acknowledgement that there was a huge mistake here. Not, well, the mission was a success, and this isn't as bad as Abbey Gate in Afghanistan. We were talking about the lives of pilots and sailors here. So they need to acknowledge that it's serious, do an investigation to find out how this happened. How does a journalist get invited into, probably the most sensitive space on the planet, and then take the steps to make sure it never happens again. And that people who made mistakes, especially deliberate mistakes or sloppy mistakes, are held accountable. None of that has happened. The Secretary of Defense, this lightweight guy, is still out there suggesting that it's all Jeffrey Goldberg's fault, and so we have a long way to go. Because, in the military, there's an element of the culture that says that whatever happens, because you handle nuclear weapons, because you try to land planes on aircraft carriers, when something goes wrong, it is serious as a heart attack. And so everything stops, and all of the steps that I just described get taken, none of which this administration or these people have done yet.
So I was over at the White House yesterday and was hearing their messaging saying, we're doing an internal investigation. No one died. No one needs to be fired. It's time for everyone to move on.
Yeah, of course, right? I mean, frankly, the fact that they admit to a mistake is probably the most un-Trumpy thing I've seen. But, they understand the seriousness of this, that, pilots and sailors were put at risk. So they're grudgingly, but you know what? They don't get to say when we move on. We move on when all of the steps around the investigation, understanding what went wrong, fixing it, and visiting it. That's when we move on. They don't get, look, these people who, who did this, these people who fired the folks that look after our nuclear weapons, who are, taking a chainsaw to the federal government, posting receipts that are absolute nonsense and lies. They don't get to decide when those of us who are charged with oversight move on. We decide that.
So I also have folks in the audience who are like, okay, it happened. This appears to be bad. It appears, at least based on some of the messaging we're hearing from the White House, they're not going to be using Signal for this sort of thing in the future. So the question I get from folks out there is like, why linger on this? Why does it matter? Explain to the average person why what took place on Signal matters so much that there should be further investigation into this.
Well, again, I think you just have to understand why mistakes get examined. They get examined, whether it's you falling down a flight of stairs or saying something nasty to your wife or putting classified national security information on Signal. They get examined so that you can learn to do better in the future. It's that simple, right? And when you say something or I say something nasty to my wife, we probably should learn. When you're putting military personnel at risk, you damn well better learn. And what worries me is that, the litany of things that I just ran through, this is not an administration that gets the benefit of the doubt on learning not to do dumbass things, right? And it's not an administration that says that the rules or, quite frankly, the law or the Constitution matter at all. And we can get all twisted up in our underwear about what it means when the Aliens Enemy Act of 1798 is violated. That's one thing. But when you're talking about the lives of our military personnel, don't screw around on this stuff. Wake up, take responsibility, and make sure it never happens again.
So I saw the letter that came out from your Senate colleagues where you actually saw Republican Wicker, Democrat Reed send the letter requesting, first of all, a classified briefing on this, speak with Hegseth in Inspector General's investigation over there at the Pentagon. What is your level of confidence that any of those things might happen?
Zero.
Not even you don't even think you'll get a briefing from the Pentagon?
I think that the National Security Council is probably doing some kind of investigation. Now, remember, who's the boss of the National Security Council? It's the guy who set up the Signal threat, right?
Michael Waltz.
Yeah. Mike Waltz, exactly. So this is a classic case of the, Fox investigating misbehavior in the hen house. But, again, I don't think that we make mistakes, right? This was a doozy. We make mistakes. And at the end of the day, we are going to move on from this particular mistake. But if you're an overseer like I am, and you see an administration that cuts corners, that ignores the laws, that overrides protocols, you really want to know what else is out there, right? Like, what else is putting people's life at risk? And that's the larger question here. By the way, these folks that want to move on, you and I both understand political press dynamics. These folks are keeping the story alive by not doing what any crisis manager would tell you to do, which is on day one say, oh my God, terrible error, we're sorry, we're on it. That makes this story go away, right? Instead, right. Pete Hegseth has been like, who the hell is Jeffrey Goldberg? Mike Waltz, who sets up this damn Signal thread, is calling on Fox News Jeffrey Goldberg a loser. These are not the attributes of serious people.
And we heard from the Attorney General yesterday as well, Pam Bondi. She was asked whether DOJ, which I guess in these circumstances, would the Department of Justice or FBI typically investigate something like this?
Yes, is the answer to that question. Anytime there's two laws here that may have been violated. The Espionage Act, which, by the way, the information doesn't need to be classified to be in contravention of
right. There's been a lot of emphasis from the White House. This was not classified information.
Yeah, fine. It doesn't need to be classified for its exposure to be a violation of the Espionage Act. The whole classified thing is really about trying to distract from the fact that they put pilots' lives at risk, right? And then there's, of course, the Records Retention Act. Now we're really in a space that no one really cares that much about, but happens to be important. But again, I'll let the courts work. There's no way the DOJ is investigating this because the DOJ investigation will not investigate anything that Donald Trump or his people do. What I care about and what lands in my lap is making sure that we don't have a culture of irresponsibility, of frat boy, let's just ignore all the rules kind of thing that is going to put people and our national security in harm's way. So that's really what I'm focused on right now. And by the way, hey, Pam Bondi says we're not going to invest. Can you imagine that this had happened under the Biden administration and Tony Blinken and, Secretary of Defense Austin were the ones who were doing this? They would have burned down the Capitol, right? We'd have impeachment investigations, we'd have calls for special counsel. So spare me the pearl clutching, my friends.
Well, that's something that they brought up, and I'd love to hear your response to that. Like, listen, 13 service members died in Abbey Gate. Obviously, they go back to Benghazi, and they said there was no accountability there. Nobody lost their jobs over that, Jim Himes. So why are Democrats suddenly so worried about classified information in the case of the Signal chat? But there was no accountability when it came to the withdrawal from Afghanistan. No heads rolled.
Well, let me say two things about that. Number one, let's set aside Abbey Gate for a second. But when classified information was found in Joe Biden's garage, I was pretty pissed off about it, right? And I am not a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic president. So I actually articulated that. I said, it's not okay. It's not okay in Trump's garage. It's not okay in Biden's garage, okay? And that's what we need to do. On the Abbey Gate thing, look, Abbey Gate and the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a catastrophe. You just heard a Democrat say that, a catastrophe. And Joe Biden will carry that legacy around his neck for the rest of his life, okay? But here's what we can't do. And it makes my blood boil. What Pete Hegseth and Waltz did, putting pilots at risk, well, that's not so bad because Abbey Gate, right? That is whataboutism. And the problem with that is if you take it to its logical conclusion, ho, everything is fine. You can break the laws because the Democrats do it. By the way, I got my ass handed to me for voting to censure Al Green. And I shouldn't be bringing this up, but you know why I did that? Because I wanted to demonstrate, and I pissed off all kinds of people.
Right. So just to back up here for the audience, Al Green was the member who stood up with his cane, got kicked out of the president's joint session speech. You were one of 10 Democrats that voted with Republicans to censure him.
Exactly. And I enraged all of my supporters and all the Democrats. But this is an example of why I did it, which is that if you think that what happened at Abbey Gate, which was appalling and horrible, and yes, there should have been more accountability, Democrats saying that, if you think that that somehow excuses putting pilots at risk when Donald Trump is president, you are guilty of incredible moral reasoning negligence. The rules apply to everybody. And something that happened 4 years ago doesn't excuse irresponsibility. We don't accept that excuse from 4-year-old toddlers. I'm a parent. If my 4-year-old toddler comes in after pushing her sister down the stairs and says she did it to me last week, do we say, oh, yes, darling, that's right, it happened last week, it's okay? No, we don't. We say, we're going to retain some discernment here. And sadly, America's in a place where it's okay to put pilots' life at risk because of Abbey Gate or because, anyway, that way lies perdition.
You brought it up, the Al Green vote there, and said you got your ass handed to you. Congressman, what do you mean by that? What sort of reaction did you get, and what's that backlash been like within the party?
Look, I understand it, and believe me, I've spent 2 hours with Connecticut NAACP. African Americans in particular were very hurt by that episode, and I get it. I get it. And the argument is that I hear over and over and over again from my many critics on that vote is that the Trump people are not playing by any rules. No rules, not the Constitution, not protocol, not civility, not decorum. And why are you playing by the rules? And I think I just explained why it's important to play by the rules. Because if we go down a rabbit hole of saying any behavior is excusable because the other side does it too, that is the route to chaos. And look, I know I didn't persuade lots of people, but in 2009, when Joe Wilson screamed, "You lie" at President Obama, I voted to punish him because that was a bad thing to do. And this is a moment when people, and look, I told you, I got my ass handed to me, but this is a moment for leaders to say, we cannot abandon the rules. Forget about decorum. Forget about dignity. That's long gone. But if we start saying that the rules don't matter for us because the other side breaks them, again, I can't describe to you the amount of chaos that will ensue if that's where we go.
I want to talk deportations, immigration, border, just a second here with you. A number of your colleagues are putting out statements and tweets I'm seeing regarding this tough student, Ozturk, who was arrested. Yesterday, we heard from Secretary Rubio that he believes about 300 foreign students have been arrested so far. Where do you stand on these? Where is the line that you draw when it comes to foreign visa holders and whether they deserve to continue to stay in the country? And where's the line where if you feel the government's going too far here?
We are so far over that line, so far over that line. And let me tell you this. A lot of the shenanigans, the Doge boys, the 22-year-olds with names like Big Balls firing people at the Department of Agriculture, that's going to cause a lot of pain and a lot of damage. But I'll tell you what, our children are going to look back on us the way we look back on Joseph McCarthy, who ruined hundreds of Americans' careers because of their political beliefs, or the way we look back on the internment of American citizens of Japanese descent in World War II. Our children are going to look back at the fact that we arrested people and threw them in prison because they were pro-Palestinian. And that will be up there in terms of violation of our core values with what Joseph McCarthy did. And everybody who participated in that stuff that went after people who didn't break any laws, but were simply guilty of believing something that annoys this administration. Folks, that's what North Korea does. That's what Iran does. That's what China does. We have always been different until now. So it needs to stop. Look, if any one of these people
do you believe, though, there
should be
like a line, though, that if somebody espouses support for Hamas or takes over a campus building, is there like, okay, that person should lose their visa? Like where on the spectrum would you sort of draw the line?
Very easy question. We have a line that is established by laws. So if you commit a crime, if you provide material support to Hamas, gone. If you commit a crime by breaking a window to get into a school building, gone. But if your behavior is simply consistent with the cherished right, that the reason we exist as a country is your right to believe what you want, no matter how absurd, if that's all you've done, you don't get kicked out. You don't get imprisoned in Louisiana. It's not hard. If you break the law, you're gone. If you don't, especially if you're doing something that annoys us, but is sort of right at the core of who we are, you don't get arrested for that.
So as far as you're concerned, freedom of speech extends to visa holders here.
No question about that. That's not a debatable legal point. I spend a lot of time in my job on the Intelligence Committee thinking about U.S. persons, right? The NSA cannot listen to U.S. persons, and a U.S. person is defined as any U.S. citizen abroad or anybody, including, by the way, the undocumented inside the United States, right? Inside the United States, constitutional rights, and that's a legal statement, And we need to sort of think about why they're there. They're there because we believe in the larger principle of freedom of expression. Inside the United States, those core rights, which were developed, 500 years ago, apply.
One more thing, the State of the Democratic Party headlines, I'm sure you saw the headlines this week, showing the approval numbers at record lows among Democratic voters for Democratic leadership. I'm sure you're hearing it from your own constituents. Talk of a Tea Party-esque movement, whether that's possible among the party base. First, do you think Democratic voters have a right to be frustrated with their leadership? And what do you think happens next?
They do have a right to be frustrated by it, honestly. Look, we got our clocks cleaned in November. We got our clocks cleaned not by Mitt Romney or John McCain. We got our clocks cleaned by a felon who peddles hate and division, right? So just stop there. And yeah, boy, does there need to be some reflection on why that happened. And then add to that when we dealt with the budget, the continuing resolution, the Senate leader went one way and the House leader went another way. So Americans are absolutely entitled to say, are you guys even awake? That's a fair question. And one that we're doing a lot of thinking about, that involves making sure that our leaders are unified, making sure that our leaders understand that this is not a business as usual moment. This is a moment where we rally the American people to stand up against profoundly dangerous initiatives. By the way, we got to do other stuff too. Part of the reason I'm sitting here with you is that, we got to realize that the message that we were saying, that, the Democratic message was being shouted into microphones on which there wasn't anybody on the other side. I'm dutifully going on cable news every week or so with, 200,000 people watching. Meanwhile, we didn't even know that YouTube and any number of podcast platforms had millions of viewers. So I give you that as an example of something concrete that we're thinking about and trying to do so that we are actually listening to and talking to the American people.
Do Democrats have a message going into midterms? Like, do you have a 5-point plan, 3-point plan? What are you going to do besides oppose Donald Trump?
Yeah, good question. Good question. And don't let the opposed Donald Trump thing go by. If you frame it that way, oh gosh, you're just being partisan.
By the way, I'm only restating what I hear from people.
No, I got it. I'm not arguing with you. I just want to make it super clear. Yeah, we're going to oppose Donald Trump. You know what we're really going to oppose? What we're really going to oppose is the policy that you're going to see developed in the next 4 weeks to slash Medicaid. Why? To keep up tax cuts that provide their value to the top wealthiest people in this country. That's what we're really going to oppose. By the way, I think the American people are going to feel that, right? When a Democrat goes off Donald Trump, right, it's dog bites man. Not a big story. But when we tell the story about what they're planning to your Medicaid, which is not just, insurance for poor people, it's also grandma in the assisted living facility. When we tell the story of how it's going to be impossible for grandma to sign up for Social Security, I think that's where we really engage. And so, yes, that is going to be our message. And then going forward, to do justice to your question, here's my 30-second analysis. We ran this last election, on the defense of democracy, which is darn important, and largely on women's reproductive rights. Also very important. At a time when most Americans were saying chicken used to be $6 and now it's $12. And we're out there saying, yeah, but democracy's at risk. And what the American people hear, and we even get more exotic, right, when we get forced to answer for cultural issues. What the American people hear is they don't think, I don't agree with standing up for democracy. I agree with women's reproductive rights, but son of a gun, I can't afford chicken. And so that points us in the direction of having a consistent and intense message that says we're standing up for you, middle-class America, to make sure that the American dream doesn't go away for you.
Congressman, thank you for chatting with us, and look forward to continuing this conversation. Hopefully, during one of my trips to Washington, we'll come visit.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot.